You guys know I don't usually like doing dedicated Bulls videos on the channel because I already have a Bulls channel, I'm a Bulls fan, and I try to make this channel more holistic across the NBA, but we've got to talk about the Chicago Bulls after a disaster start to their season. And while I acknowledge and have said as much on Twitter, this is a complete overreaction from Bulls fans, including myself, we need to talk about what has led up to this point and where the Bulls are at currently, the events that have transpired just since the bad first game loss of the season against the Thunder, and what it means for the Bulls going forward. Of course, as always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, it would mean a great deal to me if you subscribed. Also, if you like Bulls-specific content, feel free to check out my main channel, Bulls Central. Link to that can be found in the description. Now, back in the 2021 offseason, the new Bulls front office of Arturas Karnisovas and Mark Eversley decided to make some pretty swift changes to the existing roster that was in place from the previous regime. This was already after the Bulls made a big trade at the deadline of 2021 in which they moved 2 first-round picks and Wendell Carter Jr. for Nikola Vucevic, who was coming off an all-star season for the Orlando Magic. And going into free agency in that summer of 2021, they decided to completely revamp the roster by signing Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, and Alex Caruso. And the only 2 players that remained from the previous regime were Coby White and Zach Lavine. And to start the 21-22 season, things were looking incredible. The Bulls were flying around all over the court, highlight reel dunks, incredible transition ball movement, fast pace, spacing of the floor, high-level perimeter defense, and the Bulls instantly became one of the biggest surprise teams of the league, where they were sitting at the top of the Eastern Conference going into January. And while they would go on to do well through the All-Star break, everything kind of fell apart after the break, in large part due to the injuries of Lonzo and Alex Caruso. But because of those injuries, the Bulls kind of lost their identity. They lost that edge and confidence that they were playing with on offense, and the offense became stagnant, heavy isolation, and the Bulls fell off dramatically in the standings, finishing out the season 6th in the Eastern Conference, and then would subsequently get bounced badly in the playoffs. And then the following season, the Bulls decided to run it back with minor changes on the margins. There was the thought that Lonzo was going to miss the beginning of the year and would eventually come back, which never happened, and we still have yet to see him return to the floor. And it was more of the same thing. In fact, the Bulls looked worse. They were surprisingly a solid defensive team, but on offense, it was a massive problem without any kind of reliable three-point shooting. The Bulls had to play damn near perfect from the mid-range to actually win games. And their limited outside shooting and floor spacing, with little to no ball movement and shot creation without a true point guard, made the Bulls an average team at best. And they ended up missing the playoffs by not being able to get out of the play-in. Now, going into this offseason, it was pretty clear what the Bulls needed to improve this roster. Well, they needed to add shooting, they needed to add toughness, and they needed to add some size and depth. They needed to quickly change their overall philosophy and approach on offense. Better pace, move quickly in transition, moving the ball around, and getting open looks in the half court. And above all, they needed to start playing as a team. Guys needed to sacrifice, play for each other, play team basketball, because the talent is there. You have 3 of the most gifted players on offense, as well as some of the better perimeter defenders in the NBA. There's zero excuses to be missing the play-in and falling below 500. So the Bulls decided, let's have an off-site training camp in Nashville. It'll give the guys a chance to bond, build trust, cohesion, all that crap. And vibes were good, at least what was being reported at a camp from the media anyway. And while the preseason was meh, there were some good things to be excited about in the way they were playing. They were playing differently in terms of how they were moving the ball, getting better looks and touches, getting more guys involved on offense, but something was still missing. But you think, all right, well, whatever, it's just the preseason. We'll wait and see how the season transpires before we start rushing to judgment and demanding that they blow this thing up. Well, in the first game of the season, the Bulls got absolutely obliterated and embarrassed on their own home floor. Now, granted, if you watched the game, it was a decent game. There was a lot of back and forth, and it was close throughout, with the Bulls actually changing the overall system on offense to promote faster ball movement and outside shooting. But here's what the biggest problem is for the Bulls. When things get tough, when adversity strikes, they crumble. They're one of the worst teams in the league when it comes to staying strong, continuing to play hard, and fighting through momentum shifts. The Thunder went on a 10-0 run towards the end of the third quarter, and the demeanor, the body language completely fell apart for the Bulls. It was almost like they were accepting defeat even when the game was still within reach, something we saw countless times last season. And when that happens, the Bulls go back to their old habits. chucking up contested step-back mid-range jumpers, playing iso ball while everyone stands around and watches. And to make matters worse, you had Nikola Vucevic and Billy Donovan getting in a heated exchange on the bench for the world to see. Again, this is game 1 into the season. And on top of that, can't make this stuff up, the Bulls had to have a players-only meeting after just the first game into the year. This has to be a record for a players-only meeting happening after just 1 game into the season. Billy Donovan tried to come into the locker room and they told him they needed more time to discuss things. Now, naturally, the Bulls are trying to put a positive spin on this. This is good. They're having these hard conversations early, something that wasn't happening last year. They're holding each other accountable. They're talking about necessary things that they don't like seeing on the court, but come on now. If you're having a players-only meeting this early in the season, when this is more or less the same group from the last 2 seasons with some minor tweaks to it, these are brewing issues that should have been addressed a long time ago. But it doesn't just stop there. The following day after the game, you had Shams Charania report that DeMar DeRozan and the Bulls, as it relates to his contract extension, are very far apart on the dollar amount and the number of years. And then he further added that DeMar is unsure of the direction of this franchise, which you can't really blame him for. Bad press after bad press for the Bulls following a bad loss to start the season. Now, the reporting from Shams is a little odd because literally DeMar just a few weeks ago was talking about how he wanted to play out his career in Chicago and retire with the Bulls. Shams is the most credible source in the NBA media, but it's usually after a transaction has been completed, and not when it comes to overall rumors like when he said all indications show that the Hornets are going to be taking Scoot Henderson in the draft. But regardless of the credibility of that and whether DeMar is questioning the future of this team, that's the biggest issue here with how Bulls fans are assessing the situation. Because yes, it's only 1 game into the season, and yes, I think the Bulls will be better than what we saw in that first game. I even still think that they're going to be better than they were last season, but at the end of the day, even if this team is still a little bit better, we all know the ceiling of this roster isn't very high. We all know they're not a title contending team as currently constructed. We know they're not going anywhere outside of an early playoff exit. So yes, it's an overreaction after 1 game into the season, but the fact of the matter is, what difference does it make when we know this team has already hit its shelf life and we're just waiting for that blow up to be triggered? It doesn't matter how many players only meetings they have. It doesn't matter the level of adversity they have to go through to come out of it on the other side. It doesn't matter if they finally start figuring things out on offense. This team isn't going to be winning a championship. So what are we even doing here? And it's a question or a problem that the front office refuses to acknowledge, at least publicly anyway, that they're just kind of wasting time at this point and also diminishing the value of their most tradable assets, which in turn makes the situation even worse when the inevitable pivot to a rebuild happens. So while I'm optimistic that the Bulls will be better than what we saw from the first game of the season, and I'm also optimistic they're going to be better than most people think as the season goes on, at the end of the day, this team is not it. They don't have it in them to really make any noise. And we're just kind of in no man's land until the front office finally realizes that and does something about it. So again, sorry for those who don't really care about the Bulls, but I felt it was necessary to acknowledge the real problem here for the Bulls and it not being about how things have kicked off to start the season, but rather their future as a whole or lack thereof. Let me know in the comments, what do you think the Bulls should do to turn things around? As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.